At 3 in the morning, Greyhaven did not look like a sleeping city, but rather a corpse left unburied. Thick fog rolled from the sewers, clinging to the cracked asphalt, turning the streetlights into sickly, lethargic eyes peering through the gloom. The air was so still that the wind slipping through the narrow alleys sounded like the long, rattling breath of a dying man. Standing amidst the decay of downtown was Greyhaven Residency, a concrete monolith that pierced the sky, resembling a giant tombstone forgotten by time. It was not collapsing, nor was it being repaired. It simply existed, looming, cold, and housing apartments where, rumor had it, those who entered rarely left intact. Ethan Moore stood before the building's gate, his hand gripping his bag strap, his breath clouding in the freezing air. He had been a top investigative journalist, a bloodhound who knew no fear, but that was 3 months ago. One mistake, one story that touched people who shouldn't be touched, had cost him everything: his career, his reputation, and his comfortable uptown apartment. Now, with empty pockets and wounded pride, Ethan had no choice but to move into Greyhaven Residency. The rent was suspiciously cheap, but he had no other options. The building manager, a gaunt man named Jonathan Holloway, was waiting for him at the reception desk. His office reeked of cheap tobacco mixed with the musty smell of old paper. Holloway had eyes that were sunken deep into his skull, like two black pits, and skin so pale it seemed to have never seen the sun. "Apartment 3B, Holloway said, his voice raspy like sandpaper rubbing together. He tossed a rusty brass key onto the scratched wooden counter. "3rd floor, end of the hall." Ethan took the key, feeling a chill transmit from the metal to his fingertips. "Thank you. Is there anything I should know?" Holloway stared at him, unblinking, emotionless. A twisted smile, half mocking, half pitying, curled on his face. "That apartment doesn't keep people for long," he whispered, as if sharing a dark secret. "People come and people go, or they vanish." Ethan smirked, trying to maintain the confident facade of a cynical journalist. "I don't believe in superstitions, Mr. Holloway. I just need a place to sleep." "Suit yourself," the manager muttered, turning his back to sort through a pile of rotting files. "Sleep well, Mr. Moore." Apartment 3B was larger than Ethan expected, but it carried an indescribable gloom. The cream-colored wallpaper had yellowed with age, peeling in strips to reveal the gray plaster beneath. The wooden floorboards creaked with every step, as if the house itself were in pain. Ethan spent the evening cleaning, trying to chase away the stale scent of abandonment. He pushed his single bed against the west wall, the wall that separated his apartment from 3C next door. Holloway had said 3C had been empty for years, sealed off due to structural issues. The first night passed restlessly. Ethan's sleep was fitful, filled with images of his own failure. He jerked awake. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked a red number, 03:17 a.m. Absolute silence. No traffic, no wind. The quiet was as thick as glass. And then it came. Knock, knock, knock. 3 dry sounds, slow, steady. Ethan sat up, his heart pounding. That sound didn't come from the front door. He held his breath, listening. Knock, knock, knock. Clearer this time. It was coming right behind him, from the west wall, from the abandoned apartment 3C. "Who's there?" Ethan called, his voice echoing in the empty room. No answer. Only the knocking continued, terrifyingly patient.
It didn't sound like rats or settling pipes. It was intentional. Someone or something was standing on the other side of that wall, just layers of brick away, tapping gently, as if asking to come in. Ethan pressed his ear against the wall. Cold. The wall was far colder than the room temperature. He could feel a slight vibration travel through the plaster with each knock. "Hey, is anyone in there? That apartment is supposed to be empty." He pounded his fist against the wall. The knocking stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was more frightening than the sound itself. Ethan sat there, cold sweat soaking his back, waiting until sunrise, but the knocking did not return that night. A week passed. The event repeated like a twisted ritual. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Ethan would be woken by that sound. Knock, knock, knock. Never faster, never louder, just a haunting persistence. Ethan's health deteriorated rapidly. Dark circles formed under his eyes, his nerves pulled taut like wire. But the journalist instinct in him rose up, replacing the initial fear. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in the truth. Someone was pranking him, or a squatter was hiding in 3C. Ethan began to investigate. He scoured the city library, digging up records on Greyhaven residency. What he found made his blood run cold. 11 years ago, Greyhaven was shaken by the disappearance of a 9-year-old girl named Lily Carter. Lily lived with her father in apartment 3C. One morning, she vanished without a trace. Police tore the building apart, even dug up the back garden, but found nothing. The father, Jonathan Carter, was the prime suspect due to a history of violence and alcoholism, but due to a lack of concrete evidence, he was released. Months later, Jonathan Carter left the city, and the case went cold. But a small detail in a neighbor's witness statement caught Ethan's eye. An old woman on the second floor had stated, "After little Lily vanished, I heard knocking coming from that apartment every night. It was like she was trying to signal she was still home." That night, Ethan returned to his apartment with a different mindset. He was no longer afraid. He felt compassion and resolve. The clock struck 3:17 a.m. The knocking began. Knock, knock, knock. Ethan walked to the wall, placing a trembling hand on the cold wallpaper. "Lily?" he whispered, his voice choking up. The knocking stopped instantly. The room was deadly silent. Ethan held his breath. A second later, knock. A single, resounding, decisive knock. A confirmation. Ethan shivered. He continued, "Are you trapped in there?" Knock. "Did someone hurt you?" Knock. "Was it your father?" This time, it wasn't a knock. A violent scratching sound erupted from the other side of the wall, as if fingernails were clawing at the concrete in desperate, blinding rage. Scritch, scritch, scratch. The ear-splitting sound forced Ethan to cover his ears and stumble back. Then, silence returned. The next morning, Ethan decided to take a gamble. He snuck into the management office while Holloway was out for lunch. Using lock-picking skills learned from his days investigating the underworld, he easily opened the old filing cabinet. He found the original building blueprints from the 70s. Ethan's sharp eye scanned the numbers and diagrams. He compared the square footage of 3B and 3C. Something was wrong. According to the blueprints, between the bedroom of 3B and the living room of 3C, there was a dead space about 60 centimeters wide. It was labeled utility duct, but in reality, the building's pipe system ran along the hallway, not through that wall. That space had been sealed off. No entrance, no exit. A perfect concrete corpse sitting right between the two apartments. Ethan returned to his room, carrying a sledgehammer and an industrial drill he had just bought. He couldn't wait for a police warrant. He needed the truth now. He pushed the bed away and tore off the rotting wallpaper. The bare concrete wall was revealed, mottled with black mold like bruises.
Bam! The first swing of the hammer landed. Dust flew. Bam! Bam! Ethan struck frantically. He felt like he was liberating a soul imprisoned for over a decade. Every blow was a release of his own anger at this unjust world. After nearly an hour, a hole the size of a human head broke through. A gust of freezing air, carrying the overpowering stench of decay and damp earth, rushed into Ethan's face, making him gag and cough. He clicked on his flashlight, shining it into the black void. The space was narrow, just enough for a person to stand, but it held the most horrifying truth. Under the trembling beam of light, Ethan saw a small skeleton curled up in the corner. On the wrist bone, a cheap pink plastic bracelet still hung, the kind little girls love. Lily Carter had never left the building. She had been buried alive inside her own home. Ethan scrambled back, vomiting onto the floor. Terror gripped him, but in that moment his journalist brain connected the final dot. He ran to his desk, pulling out an old photo from the press file on the disappearance. The photo showed Jonathan Carter, Lily's father, 11 years ago. The man in the picture was heavier, with a bushy beard. But those eyes, those sunken, soulless eyes like two black pits. Ethan scrambled for his lease agreement, the signature of the manager, Jonathan Holloway. The handwriting, the way he stared, the sentence, "This apartment doesn't keep people long." Jonathan Carter had never fled. He had simply lost weight, shaved, changed his name, and stayed to guard his daughter's secret tomb. He had become the gatekeeper of his own crime. Ethan grabbed his phone, dialing the police immediately. His voice was shaking, but clear as he reported the body and the suspect. "Don't let him get away! He's the building manager!" Ethan screamed into the phone before hanging up. He bolted from the room, running down the stairs like a madman, heading straight for the management office on the ground floor. He had to keep him there. "Holloway, open up!" Ethan pounded on the glass door of the office. The door wasn't locked. It creaked open. Inside, it was empty. The desk drawers were pulled out. The safe was wide open. He knew Ethan was investigating. He had been watching him, perhaps hearing the hammer against the wall. On the desk, a single sticky note remained, scrawled in red ink. "You were too curious for your own good, journalist." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Ethan stood in the empty office, a crushing sense of failure washing over him. He had found Lily, but the killer had escaped. That night, after the police had cordoned off the scene, removed Lily's remains, and taken Ethan's statement, he was allowed to return to the apartment to pack. He couldn't stay there for another second. The room reeked of the bleach the police used to process the scene, but it couldn't mask the inherent chill. The hole in the wall had been temporarily boarded up with plywood. Ethan sat heavily on the edge of the bed, exhausted. The clock read 03:16 a.m. He stared at the changing numbers. 1 minute left. He waited. Was Lily's spirit at peace? Would the knocking return? 03:17 a.m. Silence. Ethan let out a sigh of relief. The girl was resting. The truth was out. Even if Holloway hadn't been caught, at least Lily didn't have to knock on the wall in hopelessness anymore. Ethan stood up, shouldering his bag, ready to leave forever. Knock, knock, knock. Ethan froze. The bag dropped from his hand. That sound, it was back. But this time, it didn't come from the west wall. It didn't come from apartment 3C. It came from the front door of apartment 3B, right in front of him. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He stared at the wooden door.
Through the peephole, he saw only pitch blackness. "Who is it?" he asked, his voice cracking. A voice answered from the other side of the door, not the childish voice of Lily, but a raspy, coarse voice, like sandpaper rubbing together, the voice he heard when he received the key. "Thank you for finding her," Jonathan Holloway whispered through the crack. "But truth does not always bring justice." Ethan lunged forward, yanking the door handle. Locked. He hadn't locked it, but now it wouldn't budge. "I told you this apartment doesn't keep people long, but you will stay here forever." Then came the sound of footsteps, but they weren't walking away. The footsteps walked through the door, stepping into the room, even though the door remained shut. The temperature in the room plummeted, Ethan's breath turning to ice. The light bulb on the ceiling began to flicker violently, then shattered. Darkness consumed everything. In the thick blackness, Ethan heard the knock one more time, but this time it was right next to his ear. Knock, knock, knock. And then a cold, stiff hand was placed upon his shoulder. The next morning, when the police returned to find Ethan Moore for follow-up questions, apartment 3B was completely empty. No signs of struggle, no furniture overturned. Only the window was open wide, letting in the freezing wind. Ethan Moore had vanished, just like Lily Carter 11 years ago. And in other buildings across Greyhaven, residents began to complain of a strange phenomenon. At exactly 3:17 a.m., they heard knocking, not just from inside the walls, but from under the beds, from inside the closets, from within the mirrors. The evil had not been destroyed. It had simply found a new host, and it was hungrier than ever.